Today I'm going to walk you through how to solve some equations using square and cube roots, and there are a few things we need to make sure we know. The first thing we need to make sure that we remember is how to actually find square and cube roots, and you are now allowed to use your calculator. There is actually a video on our website that reminds you how to find square roots. I know those aren't very pretty symbols, but a square root and a cube root using your calculator. So if you are not sure how to do that, please go back and review that video now. The second thing you need to remember is a little something called inverse operations. And this is something that you learned in 6th and 7th grade. If you're solving an equation, for example, I'm going to use a real basic one here. We needed to find what x is by itself. And in order to do that, we have to get rid of that plus 2. Inverse, hopefully we remember, is a fancy word for opposite. So we're going to use an operation that is the opposite of plus 2 in order to get rid of a plus 2. So we're going to get rid of it using a minus 2 because it's the opposite or inverse. So that's going to cancel. And now I've got my x by itself or isolated. But hopefully we all remember that if we subtract something from this side of the equal sign, we've got to subtract something from the right side of our equal sign. So x is equal to 4. Another example might be, this time instead of using addition, I'll use subtraction. So instead of an addition 1, I'll do a subtraction 1. Again, pretty straightforward. So let's say x minus 6 is equal to negative 11. So that x is not by itself. I need to get rid of this minus 6. And again, guys, this is really just review from 6th and 7th grade. So if you've got a hard time understanding what we're doing right now, please make sure that you see your teacher so that we can help you to get some of this background 6th and 7th grade information figured out to make you successful with the 8th grade information. So I'm going to cancel out this minus 6 with the inverse, which is a plus 6. Going to leave the x by itself. Again, if I add 6 to this side, I got to add 6 to this side in order to keep it balanced. So x is equal to negative 5. So basically, the things you need to remember when it comes to equations is that you use opposite or inverse operations in order to get a variable by itself. And what you do to one side of the equation, you have to do the other. So how does that help you here with number 1? I'm going to rewrite this kind of over here to the side. So it says that x squared is equal to 36. Now, when you're solving an equation, as we talked about in the couple previous examples, you want to get an x all by itself equal to a number. Now, right now, the x is pretty close to by itself, but we've still got that pesky squared. So if you think about it, it's really an x times x. So that's not an x by itself. That's actually 2 x's that are being multiplied. So we've got to get rid of that squared. Hopefully we remember from class the last several days that the opposite of squaring something is to take the square root. So if I take the square root of x squared, it kind of, let's just say, cancels out the squared. And that's going to leave me with just an x. Just like when we're solving any other equation, though, if I square root the left-hand side of my equation, I'm going to scoot this over just a little bit here. I need to square root the right side of my equation. So the square root of 36 is 6. And don't forget there are actually 2 square roots for everything, 6 and negative 6. You are allowed to use your calculator for this, by the way. So you should have just put the square root of 36 into your calculator if you weren't sure what the square root was, and it would have given you 6. Example number 2 is really just a very simple one that can be solved with your calculator. It's asking you to find the cube root of 27. So you'll remember from our previous video, all you need to type into your calculator is 27. Tap the little raise to, that's called a caret button. So the 27 raised to a power of 1/3. If you put all of that in your calculator correctly, all you're going to see is that you just should have had 3, because the cube root of 27 is 3. In other words, 3 times 3 times 3 equals 27. Example number 3 is also very similar, because all we're trying to figure out is the cube root of negative 125 is equal to what? So you can just put in your calculator again. Negative 125 raised to a power of 1/3, because remember, a cube root means a power of 1/3. So if you put negative 125 raised to the 1/3 power in your calculator, it should give you negative 5 for your answer. Number 4, you're being asked to write these numbers in order from least to greatest, and I'm simply just using my calculator. Again, you're allowed to use it, so please just use it. So I'm just using the square root button on my calculator, the square root of 136, and it actually ended up being 11.7 something, so I just round it to 11.7, because right now we're just rounding to the nearest tenth. If I put in my calculator for the second one, remember, it's 800 raised to the 1/3 power. If I did that correctly in my calculator, I should have gotten approximately 9.3 if I'm rounding to the nearest tenth. Check yourself with the calculator as you do this. If I put 64 raised to the 1/3 power, my calculator simply gives me 4. And if I put the square root of 50 into my calculator, again using the button we've already shown you how to do, you're going to get approximately 7.1. So now that we've done the hard work, now we've got to put these guys in order. So the smallest number, it says from least to greatest, so the smallest number is this one that's 4, which is the cube root of 64. The next smallest is going to be the square root of 50, because it's 7.1. The next one is going to be the cube root of 800. And finally, the only one that's left is 136. So now these are in order from least to greatest. Example number 5 is also very similar, but now we've got a word problem. I know how we love these. Please remember to use, first of all, our CUBES acronym that we use when we're in class. And I like to usually skip ahead for a second, and I like to skip the circling part, and I like to go to the U, underline the question. The question is asking me to find the approximate length of the edge, and it looks like I'm following the edge of a cube. So I'm going to draw myself a cube. This is not going to be a good drawing, so nobody making fun of me at home. Okay, so I've got a cube, and it says that the volume of a cube is 80 feet. So we're going to recall that to find the volume of a cube, you multiply the length times the width times the height. And because it's a cube, all three of those numbers are the same. So x times x times x, it tells me that my volume is 80. So x times x times x is going to be equal to 80. If I multiply my length, my width, and my height together, I'm going to get 80. Another way to write x times x times x is x to the third. So now I've got one of those problems that I can solve with my calculator, one of those equation issues. Because right now, I have an x cubed. I do not have just a plain old x. I've actually solved this equation when I have something that looks like an x on one side and then a number on the other, not this x cubed. So we have to basically, one way of thinking about it is kind of uncube this x cubed. So what's the opposite of x to the third power? We've got to cube root it. So if I cube root x to the third power, it's basically like I'm using the opposite to cancel out that third power. So I'm just left with an x. It's an equation, so if I cube root the left side of my equation, I'm going to have to cube root the right side of my equation. Now I'm just going to use my calculator to do 80 raised to the 1/3 power. 80 raised to the 1/3 power, if I am rounding the way we're told to the nearest tenth, is going to be approximately 4.3. So that means the length of the edge of the cube is 4.3 feet. In number 6, it's a little bit different. Okay, so I can see, I'm going to circle my key number. This time it's actually asking me, I'm going to underline the question, it's asking me what is the volume? Okay, so I'm going to box this math term. Again, I'm going to draw a pretty crappy cube, but here we go. Okay, so it says the length of the edge of the cube is 2.6, so that's the edge. So again, we know that to find the volume, we need to multiply the length times the width times the height. Well, in a cube, the length, the width, and the height are all the same. So I'm going to put in my calculator 12.6 raised to the 3rd power, which is the same thing as 12.6 times 12.6 times 12.6. If I do that, I'm going to end up with approximately, if I'm rounding to the nearest tenth, 2000.4, and my units were inches, and we're talking volume, so this is going to be inches cubed. Number 7 involves a square this time. So it says the side of a square is 21 inches. So I've got a square. I'm going to box my math term side. The side of it is 21. I'm going to underline the question, what is the area? Well, to find the area of a square, we do base times height or length times width, depending on what your teacher calls it. Well, because it's a square, the base and the height are the same. So to find that area, I'm going to do 21 times 21, or in other words, 21 squared, and that's going to leave me with approximately 441. Last one. This time it actually gives us the area of the square. So it says the area of the square is 150 feet. I'm going to box area. So I'm going to draw a square, and the area, so this time in the middle here, is 150. What is the approximate side length of the edge? So we know that in order to be able to find the area of a square, we do length times width or base times height. So in this case, it's going to be x times x. It's a cube, which means the base and the height are going to be the same number. So x times x equals 150. Well, x times x is also written as x squared, because that's the same thing as x times itself twice. So we've got another issue where we've got a squared symbol we've got to get rid of. Well, how do you get rid of squaring something? You take the square root. So to take the square root, or after I take the square root, that's going to leave me with just an x. If I take the square root of one side, though, I got to take the square root of the other side. Again, you can use your calculator because this will not turn out to be quite an even number. So the so the square root of 150, according to my calculator, is approximately 2.2.